Welcome to Holly Farm. I'm Dave Stanley and I'm an independent environmentalist, but I'm also a hobby farmer. That is, if 80 acres and 40 head of cattle qualifies as being a hobby. This farm is 100% pasture and we are only producing beef. Now, I'm sure you've all heard about the issues associated with beef production, methane and climate change, and the fact that cattle are supposed to be one of the world's biggest criminals. Well, let's go and take a look around and see what's actually going on here. This is a typical intensive arable field, and as you can see, last year it had wheat and it's been re-drilled for oilseed rape. Now, this field has been properly managed in accordance with DEFRA guidance in terms of its use of fertilizers and pesticides. However, despite that, something big has been happening, and that big thing is actually to do with the soil organic matter, or the soil carbon. And over the last 40 years or so, there's been a dramatic decrease in the levels of carbon in these arable soils because of our intensive arable farming system. Does that matter? Well, it does actually, in all sorts of ways. Starting with the fundamentals, as most gardeners will realise, that the soil organic matter, which is the compost and manure that you put back into a garden, is very good for retaining moisture. And if you deplete those levels of organic matter, then you're going to be more susceptible to drought, and more importantly, with climate change and the expectation of more severe weather patterns, you're going to be more susceptible to flooding as well, because the soil doesn't retain the water in the same way as it would do if it had organic matter in it. But it also relates to the quality of the crop that's produced itself, because with that loss of soil organic matter, there's been a loss of nutrients. All those things which are actually essential for your overall health, and they're being depleted in these soils because of this lack of maintaining of the soil organic matter, and indeed its replenishment. Now, the only way that can be maintained is actually through a mixed farming system, incorporating grass lays, pasture land into the mix, and there we're back to taking another look at livestock and cattle. These intensive arable systems for a 20-25 year period gave us a significant increase in yields, with wheat, for instance, going from 4 to 8 tons per hectare. However, for the last 15 years or so, these yields have plateaued. Reasons for that are uncertain. However, with a rising world population expected to go to 9 billion, there's huge concerns as to how we're going to feed these people. So the question is, what are the options? Are there smarter ones than this? This field 10 years ago was also inarable, and to the best of my knowledge had been for the previous 50 years or so. When we took it on, it was ploughed, rolled and drilled with a meadow mix which consisted of a dozen or so different varieties of grasses, 3 or 4 legumes and a cross section of wild flowers. Now, the change that's taken place over the last 10 years is quite important. The changes in the soil and the changes in the grass itself. If you take a look at the grass, you can see that these different grasses and legumes and the herbs and wild flowers are all pulling up different combinations of nutrients, which have a huge benefit not only in terms of animal health but also human health as well. The management of this land is quite important by mob grazing, and by that I mean having the cattle in, intensively grazing it to take it right down, and then moving them on to another field, allows for an invigoration of the growth of the grass itself, and that also contributes to improving the soil organic matter underneath. Typically we turn around and graze these fields there till the back end of May, remove the cattle to a confined area, and then after 6 to 8 weeks take in the hay and then move them back out onto the grass itself, and that gives us sufficient hay at a stocking rate of about 1 per hectare for enough hay to see them through the winter and hence maintain our pure grass-fed system. Now let's go and take a look at the meadow field. to the best of my knowledge, that's had no artificial fertilizers or pesticides applied to it for 50 years or so. It's got a very wide variety of grasses and plants and wildflowers in it, and I'm particularly proud of the fact there's 3 species of orchid. This is the field, it's natural meadowland, and as I mentioned, to the best of my knowledge, it's never had any fertilizers or pesticides on it. And indeed, in June, July, it's a blaze of colour, and also you've got the hum of all the insects as well. What you can't see here though is what's been going on below ground. In comparison with the arable field that was behind us, where the carbon content there was of the order of about 50 tonnes per hectare, the carbon levels here are 250 tonnes per hectare, i.e. 5 times greater. What this indicates though is the importance of grassland in terms of not only maintaining but also sequestrating that all too important carbon from the atmosphere. Livestock are a critical part of the pasture land equation, and here you can see a few of my Lincoln Red cattle. As you know, cattle are responsible for emitting methane, which is 20 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. These cattle emit around about 50 kilograms per year, which equates to 1 tonne of carbon. However, if you remember, we're actually sequestrating 3 tonnes of carbon per year on this pasture land. In other words, we're 2 tonnes of carbon in credit per year per hectare. As we look into the future then, rather than seeing cattle as climate change criminals, we should see them as part of the system, a system that's going to incorporate pasture land with mixed farming to supply us with high quality food, be low input, and also be sequestrating carbon back into the soil and enhancing biodiversity.